Okay, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the briefing room. My name is Eric Cavanaugh. I will be your moderator for today's event. And folks, this is a really fun and exciting topic. I'm very excited today to have Tableau software and our very own Dr. Robin Bloor online for a webcast focused on data visualization and the art of self-reliance. Yes, indeed. So there is a slide about yours truly. Actually, let me hand over the keys. I'm logged in twice here today just for kicks, so that's what's going on here, folks. So here, this is the slide about yours truly, and enough about me. So let's dig right in here. The mission of the briefing room is to reveal the essential characteristics of enterprise software, as many of you now know. So it's a forum for detailed analysis of technologies. What we do is we pair innovative vendors with independent analysts to get revealing conversations about what is going on in the field of enterprise software. Obviously, you as our audience members play a big part in this whole process, so we rely on you for some great questions. Don't be shy. Send them in using the Q&A component of your webcast console, which you can find in the lower right-hand corner. So we cover a different topic every month. April is intelligence. You can see May is integration, June is database, and July is cloud. And the reason we do it that way is we want you as an end user to be able to do apples-to-apples comparisons across various disciplines. So if you're out there getting ready to purchase some tool, obviously some of these tools are not terribly inexpensive, and you want to make sure you're getting the product that you think you're getting and that you want to get. So that's why we have the same topic in a whole month. All right, so Ralph Waldo Emerson, "'Tis the good reader that makes a good book." The reason this came up is because we wanted to talk about self-reliance, and I thought to myself, isn't there some author, some famous author who did a series of essays on this topic? And Mary Jo Knott, our editorial director, said, yes, Ralph Waldo Emerson. I had thought of Henry David Thoreau, the other three-named person, a famous literary character. But no, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and boy, there are some fascinating quotes that he has on this topic. So I dug up one for myself along this theme. "Trust thyself," he wrote, "every heart vibrates to that iron string. Accept the place the divine providence has found for you, the society of your contemporaries, the connection of events. Great men have always done so and confided themselves childlike to the genius of their age, betraying their perception that the absolutely trustworthy was seated at their heart." So if you think about how that applies to our topic today and the whole concept of data visualization, you out there in your particular business role are trying to get things done. You're trying to tell a story. You're trying to either perhaps convince senior management or your partners or your colleagues or someone on your team that some hunch you have is true. And so how do you get that job done? Well, obviously, you do some research. You have sort of play with the data and you validate your hypothesis. And sometimes, of course, you need to start by playing around with the data to get some idea of what's going on underneath the covers. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How can you use data visualization to explore what's happening in your organization, to explore your data, to discover meaningful trends that will impact either the top line or the bottom line or give you some insights as to what action to take, and how can you do that using some of these tools today. So that's what we'll talk about. So our analyst is Dr. Robin Bloor, calling in all the way from San Francisco. Happy to have him online today. Tableau software, I've been following these guys since way back in 2005. They demoed at the TWI San Diego conference, I believe in August of that year. And I remember the first time I saw it and saw how easily you could drag and drop different data sets and mix and match different sets of data. I was very impressed and thought this is exactly what our industry has needed for a long time. Well, I'm not the only one who thinks that. They've really been on a tear the last 5 years especially, and we're very pleased to have them in the show today. So Suzanne Hoffman, she's a Senior Director of Analyst Relations at Tableau. She has 20 years of sales and management experience working for a whole variety of companies. You can see a who's who there: SPSS, Metaphor, Cognos, Arbor Software, Hyperion, HyperRoll. So she's been around, and she knows what happens at big software companies. We're very happy to have her experience here today. So with that, Suzanne, I'm going to hand you the keys to the WebEx. There you go. And you should now be able to just click on that slide somewhere and use the down arrow, and there you go. You're off to the races. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Eric, and welcome, everyone. So to paraphrase what Tableau is all about, we simply help people see and understand their data. This concept came to fruition in 2003 in the labs in Stanford, and that mission statement is oh so true today, and that's exactly what we do on a regular basis, to simply help people see and understand their data. So what's interesting in doing that is, from a visual standpoint, we're really trying to change the way people interact with information. It isn't just looking at a chart or using colors. It's an entire life cycle that helps identify about your data, establishes the structure of the data, chooses the best way to visualize that data, and then draw conclusions or insights from those visualizations. It's really about getting conclusions supported by the data. So the concept of decision support, which is sort of predates business intelligence, means that you're able to tell a compelling story succinctly. And you really need to be effective throughout this entire cycle of finding the data, analyzing the structure, viewing the data, developing some insight, and then iterating through future evolutions of the data and able to make best use of it. And I'm going to augment what Eric started with, which were quotations from Ralph Waldo Emerson's essays on self-reliance, with another quote. And it says, "A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within. None that he knows what that is, which he can do, nor does he know until he has tried." So the basis of self-reliance is all about being able to structure your data or look at your data from an outside looking in perspective. It's not a structured method that you go through the data, but you rely on yourself, your intuition, to tell you what the next move should be. And part of the challenge that we all have in the world today, though, is the fact there's a huge amount of data that is just in our face constantly. You know, we all know that there's zettabytes of data that are, you know, expanding on a very rapid basis, and they take all different forms. We've got barcodes, we've got Twitter feeds, we have blogs and web data just coming at us at a profound level of detail. And there's always something that may be telling, but there's a lot of noise as well. And we need to be able to synthesize through the data to come up with those nuggets, those elements, which really are going to help us understand what the data is trying to tell us. And, you know, IDC estimates that there's about 6 million petabytes of digital data that we'll have at our fingertips in 2015. That doesn't need to say we need to use it all, but we need to understand that it's there, and someone may, in fact, be using it to help them better understand how to make a decision. So if we step through this again, it's not just the fact that the data exists. It's actually about how to get to the meaningful data and wherever it lives. So we're talking about the data being inside of our firewall, external to our firewall. We're talking about cloud data sources, such things as Google Analytics and Salesforce, which are prevalent in our industries. It's getting to all the flavors of Hadoop. We're adding more data connections all the time and more access to this information. And it's critical to make a good, cogent business decision that all of these data stores are available. And we don't want to necessarily extract that information. We want to attach to that information where it resides and then blend it back together with a variety of different stores, which will help us make better business decisions. Now, to be able to do that, we have to be able to do it in real time or in almost real time. So it's really important that the data that we get to be able to be accessed quickly, efficiently, and really push the limits of what we know is performant today. So in our newest release, our version 8, we've actually rebuilt our engine. And the reason we did this was so that we could iterate through thousands, if not millions, of data points very quickly. So there's a time span during which we can be patient. It's usually no longer minutes. It used to be hours or days or weeks. Now we see things in minutes and sub-seconds. So if we're looking at a visualization, our eye goes through that visual in a 3-second span. I can actually look, pull out my highs, my lows, my outliers in a very short time period, even looking at this simple graph. I immediately know into the upper right, that's not where the bulk of my data is. I might want to isolate those few data points that are up there and use those to figure out, is my data clean? Is my data trying to tell me what my next trend is? All of this information is at a blink of an eye, and this is the type of reaction we want with the many billions of records that we have available to us today. Now, the next key is the fact that what we really want to do is be able to be 100% mobile while we're doing all this. That means we want the ability to look at our data, whether it's on an iPad or an Android tablet or a Microsoft tablet, whether it's on a phone, or if we're in an internet cafe and we're not in our hometown and we need to be able to access the information. It's the ability to go in a browser, to be able to access a visualization or a dashboard that's been created for you, but even one step further, to be able to change the data in the view, to be able to look at different view types and maybe do calculations without having to download any additional software. So it's expanding the typical functionality from being more of a self-service environment to becoming self-reliant, and to actually being able to look at things as we want to consume them, not as someone else has perceived we'll need to consume them. So it's really a movement forward, and that's why we talk about self-reliance more beyond just a self-service environment. I just wanted to step back for a second. I know Robin wanted to know a little bit more about the architecture that Tableau has, so I thought I'd just throw in a schematic that gives us an idea of the architecture that we've got. So we're really looking at where the data resides. I mean, that's the most key element from a Tableau architectural perspective. And we really want the data to stay where it lives today so that we're not creating extra silos of information, but what we're doing is actually connecting live to that data. We bring it back and we blend the data sets. It's maintained by IT, so IT governance isn't overshadowed. We establish a well-structured data architecture, but then we also have a very high-performant in-memory engine, which enables when you have a more complex SQL query that you want to do, or just the data access is too complex, and you don't have the capability to actually go live every time with a new query, you may want to bring back a subset of the information, and a fairly large subset, into the Tableau in-memory engine to be able to manage it there. So we've got the capability of going live, of using our in-memory store. It's a highly compressed engine, and it gives you the performance that you expect, even if it's not exactly a clean database or the SQL query was too complex. But you see that center section, that VizQL compiler, that's where the IP of Tableau resides. That's what was developed in the Stanford lab in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and that came to be as Tableau software. Now there's a tie between Tableau, Stanford, and one other company. We're one of the only company that I know of that actually has Academy Awards in addition to patents. So in your typical software environment, you develop patents and you develop them for a business reason. Well, our founders actually came from Pixar Studios, so we actually hold patents in the motion picture industry, and we've leveraged that skill in helping our business users feel comfortable in a highly visual environment. So what it means really is that you have a total access to the data. Data can be anywhere and stay there. We have an optimal high-performance columnar store, but most of our software does have a live connection capability. We're preferred by IT for that reason, because we really are well-behaved in their environment, but we do have the in-memory engine to augment our live connectivity. So it's truly the best of both worlds, and we're not forcing you to extract the data, but we're enabling virtually anybody in your organization. So today, if you think about the number of people who are enabled for business intelligence, a typical company will have 20 to 25% of their top management tier as users of business intelligence. And my question is always, well, how have you enabled the rest of the organization? And the ubiquitous desktop tool, Excel, is usually the only other technology that's available to your, new managers, the people who are further down in the organization or departmentally involved. And what we do is we can step in and augment your existing business intelligence platform by giving your lower-level managers, your lower-tier managers, who are making discrete decisions on a daily basis, we can give them a technology that allows them to be self-reliant, that allows them to have access to the information they need to make good, cogent business decisions. And this is, heavily endorsed by, a wide variety of organizations. There was even a quote, not related to us, but related just to decision-making capabilities by John Chambers. And this is not a new quote. In the same way we're quoting Ralph Waldo Emerson from the 1800s, John Chambers made this quote some 15 years ago, and he basically said that if I could empower my middle and lower tier managers to make business decisions, instead of making hundreds of decisions a year with my senior leadership team, I could make millions of decisions. Now, if you think about that, you're enabling a level, a class of user who today they need to scrape the data out, they put it into a sub-segment, it's away from the mothership of data, and it really is not as impactful as it could be if everyone's on the same page, they're accessing the data live, and they have the ability to collaborate and share that information in a highly visual environment. So that's really where we're getting to with Tableau. There's more than 11,000 organizations or companies that use our technology today. There's people who are in, mom and pop shops, one-man shows that one person has it, to organizations with thousands of users. So it scales tremendously in your organization, going through a desktop environment where you author to a server environment where you can share, collaborate, and use your mobile devices over the web. So in a nutshell, that's the easiest thing to tell you about with Tableau. So I am going to actually go over and share my desktop so that we can look at Tableau directly. Okay. So this is the Tableau desktop. As I said, this is the authoring environment for Tableau, and realistically, it's a blank slate, right? We're in a creation mode here. I'm going to go over to our data. I've got a couple different places. I can connect to data here. I can do my drop-down and connect to data here, or I can go over to my tab here and connect. So I've got multiple places, and you'll find that throughout Tableau is that there's not a single location that you can do everything. You can do it in a ribbon, you can do it in a drop-down, or you could do it in a point-and-click environment. I very rarely touch the keyboard in working with Tableau. One of the things we mentioned is we talked about live data access, and these are all the data architectures and databases that we can get to live from Tableau. We've worked with those organizations. We've done a performance build of a driver in conjunction with them. You'll see various flavors of Hadoop, like Cloudera, MapR. We've got analytic engines like Netezza, like ParExcel, like Greenplum. You also see OLAP engines such as Essbase and the Microsoft Analysis Services, and then a whole variety of other stores that we get to. Most notably, as I mentioned before, we've got Google Analytics and Google BigQuery, but you see other people's in-memory stores like SAP HANA, and then of course you've got Salesforce.com, which is one of the major cloud components that most people use. The other thing is an open ODBC driver. So if you don't see a database of choice here, if you don't connect to Teradata or DB2 or Oracle or one of the mainline relational databases and you have another one, you can build the you can use this to get to the driver to open that database for yourself. Because I'm sitting here on a laptop, I'm actually going to go up and just attach to an Excel data file here. And I've got a subset of my Superstore data. We're going to connect to that. Now, the first thing it asks me is, do you want a single table from the database or do you want multiple tables? Obviously, in Excel, these would be tabs of data, but I have the ability to attach to a wide variety of data even within a single database. It's not just one table. I can go after multiple tables if I want. And here's where I actually determine, do I want to import some of the data, all of the data, or connect live? And we're going to connect live to this data set. Tableau brings the data back and shows you what the data structure is. Here's our dimensions and here's our measures. And I can simply start iterating through by clicking on the fields themselves and bringing back the data. So it's literally brought back all the rows of data, which is $8,951 worth of data. It's the sum of sales of data. And then I can actually start to look at my data a little bit more introspectively. Maybe what I want to do is look at the data by product category, or I want to look at those product categories by sub-product category. So I'm starting to iterate through it. All I'm doing is pointing and clicking to the data. And I see, wow, I've got these data sets here that are little ones that I really don't want to have to deal with. So I'm just going to grab all of them. I'm going to group them together, and I'm going to relabel them. It's the first time I've touched the keyboard. I'm just going to call them small items. Oops, I've got to be able to spell. What are the hazards? Okay. So we've renamed that a particular set of data. We've created a group. Here's that group that we've created. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Tableau is it reads the data. This is part of the IP of the product. It goes and it reads the first 10 rows and says 10 rows and looks at the columns and says, what type of data are we dealing with here? So in this particular example, dimensions and measures, which are typical of analytic data, it's going to make some assumptions about things it reads. It understands dates. It understands geocoding. It understands alphanumeric. I've got other databases that have true-false. So it's bringing that information and giving you a glimpse into what kind of data it might be. It doesn't always do it accurately. It looks at numbers and thinks they're all measurable or metrics that you can change. But we know that order ID we can't change. It's a fixed value. So I can just grab it, and I've restructured, and here's my order ID now up where it belongs as a dimension characteristic. So this is more or less a view of what the semantic layer of the database would be rather than actually changing the semantic layer of the database. What I can do here, just to make things interesting, is I actually want to look at the profitability of this data. You get a completely different picture of what we're looking at. So now I'm looking at profitability, and I notice there's a problem with tables. So what we've done here is in a very short period of time just iterated through some very common data we had to find out what's going on, and I found this challenge. So I'm actually going to go up and I can rename this sheet, and we're just going to look at this in products. So now we've taken that one sheet and created values with it. Now I'm going to try another sheet. So the same paradigm as you might have with Excel. You've got sheets underneath, and we'll build a dashboard from there. So one of the things I have in this, we mentioned before, is I've got geospatial data. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to put in some geospatial data. So it knows from the longitude and latitude, and there's 14 levels of geocoding built into the product. Go all the way down to the zip code in the United States, and you go down to most city codes around the world. But it knows that there's been sales in all of these different states, so it brings back the lower 48 for us, where we actually have those sales. Now I can do a variety of different things from here. I mean, we're just looking at information on sales. I could then go in and I could say, show me profit by color. It brings up chloroplast map because it understands now that I've got, and let's go to show me. We're from Missouri, so it says, what's the best way to represent this data based on what I have? So it tells you at the bottom here, it says if I have a particular type of chart that I would like, here is the number of dimensions and measures we would have. And this is the one we're on right now, so it's a filled map. It says you need one geocode dimension and at least one measure. So now we've got information here, and we can show me back up, information here on what's going on. Now what we might want to do is I might want to look at this and say, let me filter it by date. And I want to do a range of dates. So I could actually do it this way. Now, you know what? I really don't want to look at it by month. I just wanted to look at it by year. So I'm going to cancel out of that. One of the other things you can always do is go backwards in anything that you do in Tableau. So let me just move this up to filters for a second and say, you know, I really didn't want to do this. Let me back up. I can actually go backwards, and it will allow me to back up every single step of the way of what I've done. So let's try going through, and we're going to page through our ship dates here. So here's 2010, here's 2011, here's 2012, here's 2013. And what's interesting, we've got 2014 in here. I pulled ship date, not order date. So I have some product that's going to be shipped next year. So this is another interesting way to look at through your data. And again, as I said, I can back up at any point in time, and it will allow me to just go back to where I was initially. Okay? Let's call this map. So one of the other things we might want to look at is, let's look at order date. I'm going to put order date in the columns there, and I'm going to put sales up on my rows. This is another way I can do it. And I'm actually going to look at this over monthly data. And you see we've got some iteration going on with product. I'm going to take my product category, and I'm going to put that on color. And now I have all my different products. Now, for me, this may be a good way to look at it. For somebody else, this may be a better way to look at it. It really depends on how you want to iterate through the data. I might have someone else who wants a tree map of that same information. They feel more comfortable with that. Somebody else may like packed bubbles. It gives you the flexibility to use the data however you want to choose. What I might be interested in doing at this point is I might be interested in looking at a forecast of where my data is actually going to go. And you see it's starting to build out a forecast there. And I'm thinking that what I'm missing in this forecast is I actually need, instead of an automatic view of it, I need trending and seasonality. And let's apply that. And there you go. So now I've taken the 3 product lines, I'm actually forecasting them out for a year. I can take this, and I can also have, rename this sheet and call it forecast. And of course, what we're going to try and do next is, rather than go to a sheet, we're going to take these 3 things that we've built, and we're actually going to create a dashboard. So there's forecast, oops, my map, and I'm going to put my forecast above that. I'm going to hit automatic so it sizes everything. From this point, we can go up. We can actually go to the server. We can publish this workbook up to the server. That gives us the ability to add permissions over and above all the security and permissions that have been established for the users that you may have. I can actually send the individual sheets or the dashboard, whichever I want to do. We're going to publish this up to the server now. It's actually compressing the data and sending it with it as well.
What kind of compression is it using? Is that a custom design compression?
It absolutely is custom design compression.
Cool.
It's the same type of compression that's behind our engine, our internal engine as well. Now, Eric, I'm going to ask you if you can actually see the pop-up that just came up.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure, because the next thing I think I'm going to have to actually get a line in here. So here's where I have to actually use a keyboard.
And for those of us who are still keyboard junkies from the old typing days, I presume you can use the keyboard if you want to, like with hotkeys and kind of tab around options and that kind of thing?
To some degree, but really it's more or less designed for finger touch and mouse actions. So when it goes over to an HTML5 environment with the browser and everything, it inherits the properties of the medium that you're using. So it gains all the touch sensitivity of the mobile devices, and it expects that the types of interfaces that you really want with any kind of dashboarding is going to be a mouse click or moving around with the keypad on your machine.
Interesting.
I'm just trying to, doesn't want to let me in. And I trust you can't see what I'm doing anyway right now.
That's right. That's right. I can actually probably go ahead and bring in Robin now if that is suitable to you. So let me go ahead. But no, very interesting demo. Let me go ahead and hand the keys to the WebEx over to Robin. That'll change the screen sharing.
Right.
And Robin, you should now have control. Just click anywhere on that screen and scroll down and find your. Just go a few more down. There you go.
Okay, that must be a picture of me. Good God, I don't like that. Okay. I think the interesting thing about Tableau is that it represents in some way or other quite a new. I mean, it's not new anymore. I ran into it a couple of years ago, but it's a fairly new departure in the way that BI works. And the way that I wanted to talk about it really was, on the one side, the idea of data visualization. On the other side, the art of the nature of self-service and the emergence of the idea of self-reliance within BI. I've gone to Marcel Proust for the quote. The quote here is the voyage of since this is a quote day,
yes.
The voyage of discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And this is a kind of an interesting idea. The problem with the Excel generation, I kind of think of this as the Excel generation of people that were using Microsoft Excel for BI. There was a lot of power in Microsoft Excel, but it was extremely limited in visualization. And it proved to be extremely limited in terms of data architecture. And it was also, to a certain extent, constrained by the fact that it had many other users. It wasn't just a BI tool. It was fundamentally a spreadsheet tool. It could be used as a local kind of database, but it wasn't in any way a distributed database worth talking about, and so on and so forth. It was like a halfway house. And it was obvious to a certain extent that eventually in time it was going to be superseded. And Tableau is part of that movement, and it's very interesting to see how it's developed, in my opinion at least. So I'm beginning with the idea of self-service. Self-service in retail prompted a revolution, and people never thought in that way before in the whole of the retail area, but often in other areas of commerce. They never thought of the idea of giving an individual a certain level of self-determining capability because they would better know their context than anyone else, And when you look at it in terms of retail, it's just so obvious that it's almost not worth talking about. Effort was outsourced to the customer, cut the cost to the retailer. Customer didn't mind at all because they ended up with a better service. And then the whole idea has been repeated many, many times. It was repeated pretty much throughout the evolution of the Internet because it pretty much turned out to be an environment where the individual wanted to serve themselves, was able to serve themselves, and the sites that enable the kind of self-service and environment were the ones that turned out to be most successful in pretty much every area, in actual fact, but certainly in most areas. These are the BI categories that I keep mentioning, the idea of hindsight, oversight, insight, and foresight. Self-service BI, it makes obvious sense, but it isn't actually that simple. There are various layers of BI where if you try and apply the idea of self-service, then it becomes difficult to determine what it is that the individual is going to be allowed to do. Hindsight, it should have happened way before it did, because hindsight is just a regular reporting on what's happened before. It might now be visual reporting. It might be a really good idea now to be able to put it together in some kind of dashboard capability, or with various three-dimensional look to it, two-dimensional or three-dimensional look to it. But you know, at the end of the day, that really ought to be a self-service environment, and oversight ought to be self-service, but under the direction of various executive-level individuals. Insight is really the whole of the data analytics area, and foresight, there's a certain amount of foresight which is really obvious projection forward and can be given probably to most BI users, and then there's other areas of foresight where you really want data analysts looking into it. So it's a kind of split environment in terms of BI, and Tableaus clearly in the area of self-determination, but it's also got elements of insight to it, because there are discovery elements to what you can do with Tableau, and in my opinion, it's one of the products that's taken the idea of the of enabling the user about as far as you can take it. In terms of new eyes, I mean, this is just me marking out the various dimensions of data, but nowadays we've got different blends of data. We used to think in terms of the relational data, but now it's relational and structured data and the blending of the two kinds of data, and pretty much any source of data. There's let's say there's been an expansion in terms of the data sources in the data world that we can examine. In terms of another aspect of BI, we've certainly got much better visualization. We've also got faster analysis. And we're also into the business of more current data and all of what I would call the old cycles of BI, where you report on something weekly, or maybe you're reporting on something daily. Well, now we're getting things that are reporting in near real time, and that has been an area of significant change. And then the other dimension that I'm pointing out here is it's just more and more contextual, and you can only get contextual without with the addition of self-service. In terms of self-service and productivity, I'm just actually really pointing out that there's a kind of dichotomy here. You know, in terms of task productivity, if you enable people with really, if you enable people to do things with really powerful tools, then individual tasks will be something that they can do if they, you know, employ the capability extremely well. Then individual tasks are things that they can do well, but the individual productivity across their role or the scope of their job isn't guaranteed by actually having a better base capability at task level, because it's actually the user trying to self-design the way that the whole job works, which in a certain way involves them thinking in a particular way, and a lot of people don't and can't kind of think in that way. So they may, in one way or another, just focus in a particular area where, you know, productivity is being delivered by the tools they're using, but not to apply it across the effectiveness of their role. It's one kind of thing. And the other self-service issues here that are worth talking about. There's two, and the Tableau presentation is kind of, you know, I mean, Suzanne thinks she's done a good job without going into detail explaining this. You know, there's a user interface level, and then there's various components of capability that one might want to use, and then there's various connectivity and the use of various data sources. And there are issues attached to this, and one of them is governance and approval. You don't, you know, it's very nice to enable users to the absolute ability of them to, you know, to be able to use the enablement that's provided to them. But there's also this, governing and making sure it's not abused in any way. First, by they should only be looking at data that they really have a right to look at, and secondly, that they should only really be using the resources that are available to them to use. So there's a kind of a capacity involved in this. There's a data self-service issue as well. Data self-service isn't just having the ability to access data, but it's also having the ability to get to the data in a timely manner and not to clog the network by throwing big queries of big heaps of data simply because you want to look at data. So there's a kind of control element there. And then there's the actual efficiency, which I think I can have an interesting conversation with Suzanne about this, because there is the question of, well, if we really enable these staff that we've got with really powerful capabilities, how do we know that they're making good use of them? And I think it's a really interesting question. And that's actually how I should begin. I've kind of painted what I think Tableau's capability actually is in terms of what it covers. But I'd like Suzanne to speak to that, just to either correct me or expand on the way that I've painted it. So, Suzanne, how great a spectrum of BI activities does Tableau's capability actually cover in practice?
Well, I think that the expectation is that we're addressing a class of user that's been underserved historically. So we're not going to go as in great a depth as SAS or SPSS or R. We will start to do some of the elementary functions, as you saw, like the forecasting, and if you noticed underneath that was some trending information. What I didn't show you was the actual learning that goes along with that. When you bring up the tooltip on the forecast, it actually gives you all of the values that you would need to understand what the forecast is doing. We looked at seasonality and trending as part of it, but it'll bring up the coefficients, it'll bring up the statistical methodology that it used. So it actually helps in training new users or infrequent users that aren't statistically in-depth users, that they can actually gravitate towards it. From the rest of the business intelligence spectrum, about the only thing that we really don't do is enterprise reporting. So what you talked about, the static reporting that people used to get on a monthly basis, a weekly basis, that's not where we're focused. We're focused on the process of analyzing the data. So we're really a visual analytics tool, or rather, they call it data discovery in some instances, rather than going to, trying to achieve an end result. So I think that's sort of the middle segment of what we today call BI. That helps?
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I mean, I'm actually interested in the idea of data discovery. I mean, it's quite clear to me that if you take, the data that one might have had in Excel and, even if you're accessing it from other data sources, what you could do in Excel was very, very primitive visualization, in my opinion. You could discover things, but the visualization that you could do is fundamentally two-dimensional. And I'm not really talking about visually how it appears to you. I'm talking about the various dimensions that you can dig into the data. And what's clear with the Tableau capability is that there are many, many dimensions that you can kind of exploit in one way or another. And it can all be done fairly simply with drag and drop. In other words, you might not know. I mean, you could possibly just sit there in front of a collection of data you've created and just start dragging things into the workspace and see what happened. I mean,
right.
So I'm kind of interested as to whether, is that what people do when you provide them with this capability? Do they sit around and experiment with it? Is that normal for the way that it works?
I think that's the exact way people learn. So the biggest challenge is understanding your data, right? A new user, the best thing you can do for them is let them understand from a high-level perspective what the data is that's available to them. You don't need to give them more data, and I know you talked about that. People historically would grab as much information as they could because their place in the queue with IT would evaporate after they got their first request taken care of. So rather than having to keep going back to IT and say, well, I need this data, and I need this, and I need these files, it said, ask for it all at once. And they just give you an incredible amount of information when you only needed a subsegment of that. So this sort of transcends that challenge that historically has been one of the detriments to pervasive BI, is it allows you to get to just the data that you want to when you need it, and you learn about business intelligence through the data. The technology quickly gets out of your way because everything's drag and drop. And I can go into sort of a generalization here, and nobody take offense at this, but I'm a baby boomer. I don't understand the technology as well as my daughter, who's a millennial. These are the people who are coming into our business environment. They're in their late 20s, early 30s. They've been using computers since they were born. They grew up with them, and they understand how to go through and look for elements with right clicks and drop downs. It's just intuitive. It's ingrained in them, and they have a questioning pattern from the gaming that they've done, from the learning programs that they've used, that takes them down different paths very quickly. They don't feel that the technology is threatening, and they want to understand the data, and the technology gets out of their way. It just says, you know, it's either apparent in the face of the authorship mode of a Tableau Desktop, or it's a right click. And it's very hard to make our technology very easy, but that's what we've managed to do. People will tell you within 5 minutes they're comfortable with the product. Within 20 minutes, they've built a dashboard, and this is from ground zero. We have over 7 hours of training online for free. We have live training twice a week, and now we actually are giving away software to every university, high school, graduate student who's in a program full-time. We give our software away to them because to us what's important is the data, not so much the technology. And if we can get the technology into the hands of more users, business people, non-for-profits, educational institutions, governments, the whole gamut of vertical industries can make decisions that much more cogently. And the other interesting thing is I've been in BI a long time, and BI started in finance. That was the original users. But yet multidimensional analysis actually started in marketing and sales with the consumer packaged goods industry. That's our place of start. We go into marketing and sales. We go into operations. We go into distribution and warehousing. We're getting into all the other horizontal application areas within an organization. Then we go into finance. Because finance, for the most part, has already been seeded with a BI technology, and we don't want to disrupt that. What we want to do is, help everybody else.
Okay.
That's a long-winded answer. Sorry, Robin.
No, that's fine. I think it was probably worth you going into that. It's not a clear thing, and I think that what you described in terms of the entry area and the way that things actually evolved and blossomed out is really good. And, I think that's useful information. I mean, the question I have, and it's a kind of an interesting one, it's not an easy one for you to answer, but I did notice on one of your slides you talked about the measurement of productivity of users. And this is just a question that I've often really wondered about. It's great giving people, users, a capability that proves to be very useful to them and improves their capability to execute their role in one way or another. But do you have any effective measurement of the impact that you're making in, right down to a particular sense? It's like we gave Fred in in the supplies department, we gave him this capability and he started to use it. How much difference did it make to him individually? Do you have anything like that you can point to or speak to?
Well, I think that we have that in almost every use case that there is where we've expanded, right? A lot of companies start with a single desktop or a few desktops. They graduate to having a server so they can do collaboration and sharing. And we find organizations that say, you know, we've saved an incredible amount of time, so we can put together dashboards in hours, what used to take us weeks or months. We've got people who've saved incredible amounts of money from the standpoint of finding anomalies. They find outliers, and they realize those outliers that they're making decisions based on weren't dirty data. They were actually key elements of things gone wrong. I'll give you a real-world example. I mean, you're talking about the formulas that go behind Excel. You can actually pinpoint, because you're looking at data visually, you can actually pinpoint groupings of data that, if they wind up being outliers, that you can immediately go look at the underlying data and say, that's wrong, and either put that data back for somebody else to do fact-checking on, or to throw out that data set completely, because you don't want to move forward and make a decision on that. You know, it's the whole idea, if I look at daily changes of data, but then I look at the smoothing of data over months, the daily changes might have very disruptive data coming back. It might be telling me things that I don't want to find out. But when I do a smoothing calculation on it, it actually eliminates those outliers. And do you really want to eliminate the outliers? What are the outliers trying to tell you? So we have companies that will tell you on an individual basis. I mean, I've got people who are heroes in their organizations who've won awards because of where they've gotten to. Gregory Lewandowski from Cisco has won awards inside of Cisco for what he's been able to do and isolate using Tableau. So there are champions, and the champions are well rewarded for finding that bad data or the data that's portending a future.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I'm afraid I'm going to have to pass you to the audience now. I think I've spent too much time occupying you with questions. So, Eric, do you want to pick this up?
Yeah, we have a ton of great questions. So let me just dive right in, Suzanne. The first one comes from one of our friends in the analyst community. It's a multi-part question. First of all, how scalable is the in-memory column store? And is it a database or a cache? What percentage of queries on average run against the cache versus direct query to the underlying data, I presume is what he's saying.
Yeah. So it's fairly you know, scalable in terms of millions of rows of data. It's not, you're not going to move an entire data set in, but the compression is very good. We've got people who are taking fairly large data sets and putting it in. There's millions. We've got, trying to think of, I know of 2 accounts that got billions of records. That's something that's, you know, outside of whatever else you could store it in. So I'd say it's a pretty hefty in-memory data engine, and it is it's not a cache. It's an efficient use of both caching technology, the actual storage on disk, and swapping files. So it uses more than just what your disk is capable of storing. So it's much more efficient than if you had just an in-memory data store, and it certainly goes way beyond what your cache would be. I think the second part was the percentage of queries that run against the cache versus a direct query. So you're going to do your first visualization, and it's going to cache a small subset of the data. If you don't go outside that data set for the next iteration of your visualization, it'll stay with the data that you have there. If it needs new data, it will go out and perform a live query. So again, the IP of the product is to determine what's a live query back to the original data store and what has the cache available to it where it can get the same data retrieved.
Okay, good. And here's a really good question. I believe the attendee is asking about slider bars. The specific question is, can we grab a graph element and change it interactively, doing an instant what-if kind of scenario? In other words, drag costs down to see how profitability is influenced.
Absolutely. So at any point in time, you can grab another dimension or another metric and place it on the actual visualization. You also, and I didn't do this, and apologize for limitation on time, I can create any kind of slider bar or a quick filter that enables you to iterate through the data, not only from a date perspective, but you know, you saw all the different subcategories I had. I could limit the subcategories with various types of selectors. But in the date range, I could do slider bars. I could do slider bars that said, you know, if I'm looking at this level of profitability in only this short range. So, yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay, good. Here's another good question. One of the attendees asks, or comments, I hear that Tableau can now natively connect to Alteryx. Can Suzanne help us understand the synergies gained by coupling Tableau with other advanced analytics platforms like Alteryx?
So, as I stated, that, you know, Tableau has sort of isolated its family of analytics that it wants to do, and we've left off some other areas, which we know people need to do. It's not necessarily all of our user population that wants to do that. It's a subset of that, and therefore we have partnerships with companies like Alteryx who have a broader scope into a deeper analytics, and we have a direct capability to be a front end to the analysis that they're doing and bring it up. And you'll see Alteryx at a lot of our events as a sponsor and as a participant, because we like to show off our partners. You know, Teradata is a data store. Alteryx is an engine for analytics. You know, we work with a whole variety of other organizations that have vertical market specialties in healthcare, in education, in retail that we've partnered with. So the ecosystem is very large to get to all of those other elements of what's classic business intelligence or classic analytics that we don't do ourselves.
Okay, good. And here's a good question from one of the attendees. What is recommended in preparing data for use by Tableau?
You know, dirty data in, dirty data out. You know, we had one of the big four, I guess they're left from the big six, the big four, that were using it for looking at Basel II files and seeing how clean the files were before they were preparing reports for the SEC. And they could quickly throw them underneath Tableau and say, oh, okay, this file's too dirty, it needs to be cleansed. So you've got your data management, your data architecture, all of your data management capabilities and infrastructure, all the strategy that goes behind collecting data together and then understanding the relative cleanliness of your data. All of that is a precursor to using Tableau. Tableau can help you isolate that, but what we expect is it's not going to be on heavily dirty data. You saw the windows that show you the dimensionality and show you the measures of the metrics, your fact table and your dimensions table if you're thinking about a star schema. Well, understanding that the data in each of those cells from the database is accurate is what the software is going to presume. And if there's too many zeros or there's too many elements that have bad data, it's going to be difficult for the software itself to be able to give you meaningful results.
Okay, good. And let's see. Here's a simple question, and I'm pretty sure the answer here is no, but go ahead and tell me what you think. The question is, do I need the server version to use the dashboard tool?
Not to use the dashboard tool, no, absolutely. But if you'd like to share and collaborate and have a web browser of that dashboard with other people or go out to a mobile environment, yes, you will need the server for that.
Okay, good. Okay, here's another question for you. One of the attendees asks, when dimensions and measures are extracted from different sources, how and by which component are they reconciled from similar metadata instead of foreign keys? That's a really good question, and I know we've talked about this before on the show, but maybe you could talk about metadata and the ability to dynamically reconcile metadata fields from one source to another and the ability to unconnect or disconnect or tell the tool, no, even though these look similar, they're actually not similar.
Right. We've got a tool behind it. It's actually that one step where I said we're going to go after a single table as opposed to multiple tables. I could actually, when I bring up two files, it'll attempt to link it. The IP of the product will look for similar data to see whether it can link two tables together, and it's basically looking for that foreign key. And you can actually tell it, no, that's not what I wanted, or you can rename one of the files, one of the columns, so it does link together. You've got complete flexibility to establish the linkage between the two data files that you're bringing together. Now, the key is that there has to be some linkage, right? You can't have two disparate data files and then want to bring them into the same view. You have to have something that's going to be able, a point of a reconciliation between the two data files. And you can build that, as you said. You can destroy one which appears that it was one, but it really isn't. You can create one, or you can let the software itself create it. The interesting element is the files that are linked together, whatever the key is, wherever the join is between those two, that doesn't have to be part of the visualization, which is a critical element to know, is that it can appear as if there's no commonality between the two files that you're bringing in because that join was done on a field or at a level that's outside of the scope of your visualization.
Okay, good. We have just a couple more questions here, time for those. One of the attendees, it's a pretty funny comment, I'm sure it is pervasive, writes, I was at a Tableau customer yesterday who said some of their users were still dumping data into Excel, just as they do with legacy BI tools like Cognos. Doesn't this mean that customers still need Excel as well as visual tools like Tableau? And notes that he's a Tableau fan. I mean, I think that's just the case, and it's probably always going to be the case, right?
Yeah, the key is, how are you using Excel? We use Excel as a data store, right? So it's for storing data. But when you're doing visualizations or you're doing analysis in Excel, it's secondary to the actual storage of the data. It gives you a nice row and column format, or a way that you can access the information, but you don't analyze in the visual. The visual is an actual outcome of an analysis that you've done, and therein lies the main difference between continuing to use Excel and thinking you're doing analytics versus using Excel as a source of data. But again, going back to my roots, I just cringe every time someone says they want to put the data in Excel, because it means to me they're extracting it from somewhere else. And
right.
I'd much rather that they get to a strategy, a data strategy internally in the organization where they can go after that data live.
Gotcha. And you mentioned that for this latest version, you guys went back to the drawing board and rebuilt the engine to a certain degree. Can you offer any details on what happened under the covers there?
Well, it really was in the, sort of appreciation of the size of data that's coming down the pipe, and the fact that people needed to analyze the information much more quickly. But people are impatient, and they won't wait for a visual to come up. It'd be they're more willing to wait for a SQL statement to parse than they are willing to wait for a visual to actually parse. And so now we've got, for example, when you've got a dashboard, the visuals run in parallel. So they start to paint much more quickly, and you actually see the data coming back at a faster clip. So there's been a marked improvement even over version 7, which wasn't slow by any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But we've really been able to speed up the processing for these larger data sets, which are critical to most organizations.
Okay, great. And just a couple last questions. One, can you talk at all about the graphing engine that you're using? And I remember asking a question years ago on a webcast with Tableau about the graphic technology, and I figured it would be Flash, and was told no, it was all custom design, which at the time I wondered about. And now, of course, that Steve Jobs, before he passed on, thumbed his nose at Adobe Flash, I guess it was a pretty good idea not to go with Flash. But if you could talk about the graphing engine, then one last question about deploying to non-technical users, which I'm quite sure you do all the time.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, the graphing engine, again, that's the IP. That's what we've got a representation or a whole boatload of patents for. I mean, the visual query language that we fire off and represent back with graphics is all come out of the Stanford lab and been further developed by our very large engineering population. So our R&D organization is constantly working with graphs in different visualizations and techniques. Some of them are well received by the purists in the industry, and others where we've acceded to our user base who said, demanded certain types of visualizations that are outside of those that one would consider to be pure visual constructs. We've gone and we've added them to the product. So we're always evaluating new visualizations, and again, we build them all from scratch. We don't use anybody else's libraries.
Okay, good. And then you deploy the non-technical users all the time, right?
Well, I would presume that the majority of our users are non-technical. The IT organization is the last bastion of users of BI. This is like the cobbler's children. If you think about it, most IT organizations don't use BI.
Right.
And we're going after them now, and we're finding that they are very easily sold to because they just relish the opportunity to be able to look at all the different applications they've deployed, all the different data sets that they have out there, who's using what, how long people are staying involved, what data set isn't being used that maybe they could archive and things like this. They're getting a wealth of information about their IT organization because now they're deploying BI for IT. And they are actually the least likely ones to understand the application technology. They're not application users. So the technology quickly has to get out of their way because they're non-technical BI users.
Right.
I
love that. I love that comment. Let the technology get out of your way. That's a great way to describe it because no one wants to get bogged down in trying to understand the tool. The more intuitive it is, the better. And thank goodness for the cloud for really moving that ball downfield. It seems to me.
Right.
Well, folks, we just burned through 70 minutes. Wonderful briefing today. Very big thank you to our sponsor today, Tableau Software, for stepping into the briefing room and doing a live analyst briefing with our very own Robin Bloor calling in from the road. You can see upcoming topics, intelligence. Of course, well, that's this month. Integration is May, and June is database. Thank you so much for your time and attention, folks. We do archive all these webcasts at InsideAnalysis.com. Go there to check out our newly redesigned website. We've put a lot of work and effort into that, trying to make things easy for you to find and interact with. So let us know what you think, and we'll catch up to you next week, folks, when we talk to Wayne Eckerson and Noetics. So with that, we're going to bid you farewell. Thank you so much for your time and attention, folks. We'll catch up to you next week. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.